Και τότε έγινε το άλμα.
Every Greek state had its own distinctive calendar. 4 of the month names stood out as being really quite rare. There was one called Lanotropios, another Dodecatius, a third called Psidrius, and a fourth one called Phoenikaios, which was the first month of the calendar. We're in ancient Corinth, and here are fragments of an inscription, very early one, that gave the entire Corinthian calendar with its months. At the top of this block, we have Phoenikaios, the very month that was the first of the calendar on the mechanism. I realized that these 4 months belonged to the calendar of ancient Corinth, and so they had to be coming from either Corinth itself or from one of the colonies that Corinth had founded, for example, Syracuse over the sea in Sicily.
There were more tiny clues which might point towards a Corinthian designer of the mechanism. I was looking in the x-rays at this little subsidiary dial that's divided into 4 sectors. I noticed this word Nemea, and I had no idea what it meant. Almost immediately, Alexander Jones in Toronto emailed me with the answer. Now you have a clear reading Nemea, which I'm darn sure is indicating a year when the Nemean Games were held. This was one of the 4 Pan-Hellenic Games.
The Nemean Games took place every 2 years and were originally based on warlike events. Only warriors and their sons could take part.
We were curious as to why one of ancient Greece's famous Pan-Hellenic Games should appear on the mechanism. And how would this lead us to the designer?
They would try to get their weight to be moving just at the time of the start, and so gets his weight running forward.
So what kind of events took place here?
There were the standard running events. 1 stadion in length was the premier event of roughly our 200-meter race. There was a race in armor, a double stadium race, where the athletes wore helmets and shields. There was the Pancration, where people broke arms and strangled one another. Really lovely event.
So how important were the Nemean Games?
The Nemean Games were on a par with the games at Olympia, Delphi, and Isthmia. Those 4 sites were the crown sites.
On this small dial we found 4 sectors and the Nemean Games, the Pythian Games at Delphi, the Isthmian Games at Corinth, and finally the most prestigious games of them all, the games at Olympia that happen every 4 years.
The Olympic Games were believed to have been founded as early as 776 BC. This stadium held 45,000 people. We began to wonder why there had to be a dial on the mechanism showing the dates of these Pan-Hellenic Games like the Olympics, events that took place at such regular and simple intervals, every 2 and every 4 years, numbers they could count too easily on their fingers. The Games could therefore have offered a fixed reference for the 19-year dial on the mechanism, a fixed date transcending the rise and fall of Greek states and their magistrates and the deaths of their kings.
The surprising thing about this dial was the size of the lettering for the Isthmian Games at Corinth, far bigger than the prestigious games at Olympia, as if the Corinthian Games were much more important.
Όλα τα στοιχεία έδειχναν ότι ο σχεδιαστής του μηχανισμού ήταν από την Κόρινθο. Όμως η ομάδα πίστευε ότι υπήρχε μεγάλη πιθανότητα να προερχόταν από τις Σιρακούσες, την πλούσια κορινθιακή αποικία στη Σικελία.
In the 3rd and 4th century BC, Syracuse was the second largest city-state in the whole Hellenistic world. Founded centuries before by Corinthian immigrants from the Greek mainland, it had prospered remarkably. It became rich in food, wine and oil, and later in art and architecture.
The city's Christian cathedral was built round giant columns of an ancient Greek temple from the 5th century BC, the Temple of Athena. You can still see here at the facade the enormous Doric columns.
Significantly, Syracuse was the home of the most brilliant of all the Greek mathematicians and engineers, Archimedes.
As an astronomer, Archimedes determined the distance to the moon,
As a mathematician, he showed how to calculate the volume of a sphere and how to calculate that fundamental number pi, the ratio between the circumference of a circle and its diameter.
We believe that only a mathematician of Archimedes' status could have designed the Antikythera mechanism. As a brilliant inventor, he designed screw devices to lift water. He'd invented pulleys and gears to load and unload ships. And he designed machines with grappling hooks that could grab enemy ships out of the water.
Archimedes lived in Syracuse in the 3rd century BC. At that time, Rome started to challenge the power of Greek cities in southern Italy. The rich city of Syracuse was one of Rome's first targets. If Syracuse was taken, all Sicily would come under Roman control. Led by General Marcus Claudius Marcellus, Roman legions laid siege to Syracuse in 214 BC. Protected by the city's high walls, there was stalemate for 2 years. The story goes that some of Archimedes' inventions aided the defenders. A huge crane with a grappling hook helped pull Roman ships out of the water. But by trickery, a small group of Roman soldiers got into the city. Marcellus gave orders that the city be sacked, but Archimedes' life be spared. The Greek historian Plutarch wrote that a Roman soldier came upon an old man in the courtyard of his house, drawing circles on the ground. Archimedes was run through by the Roman sword when he refused to obey an order. "Don't disturb my circles," were allegedly Archimedes' last words.
General Marcellus was mortified at the death of Archimedes. Nevertheless, Syracuse was stripped and its treasures taken to Rome. Marcellus personally took only 2 astronomical globes with him that had belonged to Archimedes. The research team believed they might have been early versions of the Antikythera mechanism.
150 χρόνια αργότερα στη Ρώμη, ο λαμπρός ρήτορας και συγκλητικός Κικέρον γράφει ότι είδε μία από τις σφαίρες του Αρχιμίδη στο σπίτι του Μάρκου Μάρκελου, εγγονού του στρατηγού. Ο Κικέρον γράφει:
Archimedes had thought out a way to represent accurately by a single device those various and divergent movements of the 5 planets with their different rates of speed. It was actually true that the moon was always as many revolutions behind the sun on the bronze contrivance as would agree with the number of days it was behind it in the sky. Thus the same eclipse of the sun would happen on the globe as it would actually happen.
Μήπως αυτοί οι περιστρεφόμενοι πλανήτες για τους οποίους έγραφε ο Κικέρον ήταν τα τελικά στοιχεία για την κατασκευή του μηχανισμού? Μπορούσε το περίπλοκο πλανητάριο του Μάικλ Ράιτ στο μπροστινό μέρος του μηχανισμού να απλοποιηθεί ώστε να ταιριάζει με τη σχεδιαστική ιδιοφυΐα του πρωτότυπου?
I'm going to start off just by passing around some pretty pictures and then I'll explain why I'm passing them. These are medieval pictures showing the cosmos, but the way that it's shown is an ancient Greek way. What you have is the earth at the center, and you have a set of rings which are supposed to be spherical shells in which each of the planets going from the moon out to Saturn are. The front display must have been a picture like these medieval ones that showed the cosmos in cross-section.
Now I began to think, how can you mechanize these planets so it exactly predicts their positions in a way that's simple and not over complex? Mars is what I started with. You'll notice it's got 4 gears, it's got a pin in the slot, and it looks in principle almost identical to the moon mechanism.